The harsh midday sun had just begun its descent toward the western horizon when Lilah Porter first set foot in Redemption Creek, her heart as weary as her dust-covered boots. The year was 1878, and the promise of a fresh beginning had drawn her to this small but growing settlement in the Montana Territory like moths to a lantern in the darkest night. She clutched her leather satchel, its worn surface telling tales of a journey longer than just miles traveled. Redemption Creek bustled with the particular energy of frontier towns, men hauling lumber for new buildings, women gathering at the general store, horses and wagons creating a symphony of sounds that spoke of life pushing forward despite the harsh conditions. The scent of sawdust mingled with the earthy aroma of livestock, and the occasional waft of cooking from the town's single restaurant. Lilah took a deep breath and straightened her back. At 28 years old, she had left behind more than just a town in Missouri. She had left behind whispers, pitying glances, and the ghost of what could have been. Her hands instinctively moved to her abdomen, flat, empty, a reminder of promises unfulfilled. "You looking for someone, madam?" The voice startled her from her thoughts. She turned to see a man in his early 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind but kind around the eyes. He wore a dusty cowboy hat that had seen better days, and his clothes spoke of honest work rather than vanity. "I'm looking for Mr. Thompson, the owner of the mercantile," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm to be his new clerk." The man nodded, his blue eyes assessing her with interest rather than judgment. "You're looking at his place right now," he said, pointing to a substantial wooden structure with a painted sign declaring Thompson's Goods and Sundries. "I'm Keegan Everett, by the way. Most folks call me Key." "Lilah Porter," she replied, offering a small nod in acknowledgement. "I appreciate the direction." "New to Redemption Creek, then?" he asked, falling into step beside her as she moved toward the mercantile. "Just arrived on the morning stage," she confirmed, unsure why she was continuing the conversation with this stranger, yet finding something comforting in his steady presence. "Well, Miss Porter, welcome to our little corner of the frontier. It ain't always pretty, but it's got its charms." His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Thompson's a fair man. You found good employment." They reached the steps of the mercantile and Lilah paused. "Thank you, Mr. Everett." "Just Key, please," he insisted. "And if you need anything, directions, introductions, or just a friendly face, I run the livery stable down at the end of the street." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. "This town's good at second chances, Miss Porter. Whatever you're looking for, I hope you find it here." As he walked away, Lilah wondered at the strange sense of connection she felt to this man she'd just met. But she had no time for such thoughts now. Her new life was waiting through the doors of Thompson's mercantile. The interior of the store was a treasure trove of frontier necessities and modest luxuries. Shelves reached to the ceiling, stocked with everything from tools and fabric to preserved foods and patent medicines. A balding man with spectacles balanced on his nose looked up from behind the counter. "You must be Miss Porter," he said, his voice warm with welcome. "Right on time. I'm Harold Thompson." "Yes, sir," Lilah confirmed, setting down her satchel. "Thank you for the opportunity." "Mrs. Thompson and I are glad to have you," he said, coming around the counter. "Let me show you around. Then she'll take you to the room we've prepared above the store. It's modest, but clean and private." As Thompson showed her the workings of the mercantile, Lilah caught glimpses of Redemption Creek through the large front windows. The town moved with purpose, each person part of the community's fabric. In one of those glimpses, she spotted Keegan Everett again, leading a magnificent chestnut mare down the street, his movements confident and gentle with the animal. That evening, in her small but indeed clean room above the store, Lilah unpacked her few belongings. Among them was a small hand-stitched baby's gown that had never been worn. She touched it gently, then placed it in the bottom drawer of the dresser, burying it beneath her other clothes. She had come to Redemption Creek to escape her past, but some pieces of it she wouldn't leave behind. They were reminders of why she had to build something new, something that was hers alone. As she stood by the window, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant gold and crimson, Lilah Porter made a silent promise to herself. Here, she would find her strength again. The first weeks in Redemption Creek passed in a blur of new faces, routines, and experiences. Lilah proved herself a quick study and a diligent worker at Thompson's Mercantile. Her natural ability with numbers and her neat handwriting made her invaluable for keeping the store's ledgers, while her quiet dignity and gentle manner earned the respect of the customers. She learned the rhythms of the town, which days the miners came down from the hills to restock supplies, when the ranch hands rode in for their provisions, and how the town's few families would gather after Sunday services for community meals. Gradually, she began to feel less like an outsider. Mrs. Thompson, a motherly woman with a practical approach to life, took Lilah under her wing, introducing her to other women in town and including her in their sewing circle. It was at one of these gatherings that Lilah first heard the details about Keegan Everett. "Hardest working man in the territory," said Mrs. Fullerton, the doctor's wife, as she carefully stitched a quilt square. "Built that livery from nothing after the war. And never married, despite half the single women in 3 counties setting their caps for him," added Martha Davis, the schoolteacher, with a knowing smile. "That's because he's particular," Mrs. Thompson contributed. "Key's not just looking for a pretty face. He wants substance." The conversation moved on, but Lilah found herself thinking about the cowboy with the kind eyes. Their paths had crossed several times since her arrival. He'd tip his hat when they passed on the street, or they'd exchange brief pleasantries when he came into the store for supplies. Each interaction left her with a strange flutter in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, about a month after her arrival, the bell above the store's door jangled, and Keegan walked in, removing his hat as he entered. The store was empty except for Lilah, who was arranging a new shipment of fabric. "Afternoon, Miss Porter," he greeted, his voice carrying that gentle rumble she'd come to recognize. "Mr. Everett," she returned with a small smile. "What can I help you with today?" He approached the counter, hat in hand. "I'm in need of some writing paper and good ink. Got some correspondence that's overdue." As she gathered the items, he cleared his throat. "Also wanted to ask if you might be interested in attending the town social this Saturday. There's music, dancing, good food." He paused, then added, "I'd be honored to escort you if you've a mind to go." Lilah's hand stilled on the package of paper. It had been so long since anyone had shown interest in her company outside of necessary interactions. In her previous life, before the disappointments and the whispers, she had enjoyed such gatherings. But that woman seemed like someone else entirely now. "I'm not much for dancing these days, Mr. Everett," she said softly. "Then we don't have to dance," he replied simply. "But I reckon everyone needs a friend in a new place, and it's a good way to meet folks." The sincerity in his voice nudged at something within her, a longing for connection she'd been denying. "I suppose it would be good to become better acquainted with the community," she conceded. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'll call for you at 7 then. And Lilah," the use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her, "I promise you'll enjoy yourself, even without the dancing." After he left, Lilah found herself both anticipating and dreading Saturday evening. She told herself it was merely an opportunity to integrate further into the community, nothing more. But when she found herself examining her best dress that night, wondering if the blue calico would be appropriate for a social, she knew she was fooling herself. Saturday arrived clear and warm. Lilah spent extra time with her hair, arranging the chestnut waves into a style more elaborate than her usual practical bun. The blue dress, while simple, was clean and well-fitted, with a modest lace collar that had been her mother's. Precisely at 7, a knock came at the door to her room. When she opened it, Keegan stood there in clean pants and a pressed shirt, his usually unruly hair tamed and his face freshly shaved. He held a small bunch of wildflowers. "These reminded me of your dress," he said, offering them to her. "Mrs. Thompson mentioned it was blue." The gesture, so simple yet thoughtful, nearly undid her composure. "Thank you," she managed, taking the flowers. "They're lovely." The social was held in the town hall, a large, open building that served multiple purposes for Redemption Creek. Tonight, it was transformed with lanterns, ribbons, and tables laden with food contributed by the townspeople. A small band of local musicians played lively tunes, and couples already swirled around the makeshift dance floor. True to his word, Keegan didn't pressure Lilah to dance. Instead, he introduced her to people she hadn't yet met, shared stories about the town's colorful history, and made sure her plate and cup were never empty. His attentiveness wasn't showy or demanding. It felt natural, as if they'd known each other for years rather than weeks. As the evening progressed, Lilah found herself relaxing, even laughing at the antics of some of the more enthusiastic dancers. When a slower melody began, Keegan turned to her. "Just one dance?" he asked quietly. "I promise to be on my best behavior." Perhaps it was the warmth of the evening or the sense of belonging that had been growing all night, but Lilah found herself nodding. "One dance," she agreed. His hand at her waist was respectful, his hold on her fingers gentle but secure. As they moved to the music, Lilah was surprised at how natural it felt, how easily they found their rhythm together. "You're good at this," she remarked, looking up at him. "Had a ma who believed every man should know how to dance properly," he replied with a smile. "Said it was a matter of respect. She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," he said, a shadow of old grief passing quickly over his features. "Lost her and Pa both to fever when I was 19, but they taught me well before they went." "I'm sorry for your loss," Lilah said sincerely. "My parents are gone too. It's a special kind of loneliness," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That it is. Makes a person appreciate the connections they still have, though." As the music drew to a close, Keegan didn't immediately release her hand. "Thank you for coming tonight, Lilah. Seeing you enjoy yourself, even a little, it matters to me." In that moment, with the soft glow of lantern lights surrounding them and the honest affection in his eyes, Lilah felt something crack within her, the protective shell she'd built around her heart. It terrified her. "I should return to my room," she said abruptly. "It's getting late." Confusion flickered across his face, but he nodded. "Of course, I'll walk you back." The night air had cooled considerably, and Keegan placed his jacket around her shoulders without comment. They walked in silence, the earlier ease between them replaced by a tension Lilah knew she had created. At her door, she returned his jacket and forced herself to meet his eyes. "Thank you for a lovely evening, Mr. Everett." "We're back to Mr. Everett now?" he asked quietly. Lilah swallowed hard. "It's better this way. Good night." She slipped inside before he could respond, closing the door on his troubled expression. Leaning against the solid wood, she tried to calm her racing heart. She had come to Redemption Creek to start anew, not to risk the pain of attachment and inevitable loss again. Keegan Everett, with his kind eyes and gentle manner, was a complication she hadn't anticipated and couldn't afford. That night, for the first time since arriving in Redemption Creek, Lilah cried herself to sleep. The following weeks brought a subtle change to Lilah's interactions with Keegan. He still came to the store for supplies, still greeted her with politeness, but the warmth had been replaced by a careful distance. He respected the boundary she had drawn, and while part of her was relieved, another part, one she tried desperately to ignore, missed the easy connection they had begun to form. Summer turned to autumn, painting the surrounding hills in fiery golds and reds. Redemption Creek prepared for the coming winter, storing supplies and completing building projects before the snow would inevitably isolate them from larger towns. One brisk October morning, as Lilah was opening the store, Dr. Fullerton's wife burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement. "Lilah, have you heard? The Wilsons' eldest girl just had her baby, a beautiful boy, healthy as can be," she beamed, clearly delighted by the news. "That's wonderful," Lilah replied, managing a smile. "Please give them my congratulations." "I will," Mrs. Fullerton promised. "There's to be a gathering at their home this Sunday after services to celebrate. You should come." Lilah busied herself with straightening items on the counter. "I'm not sure. I have some ledger work to complete." "Nonsense. The ledgers can wait. It's important to celebrate new life in a place like this. Reminds us all of God's blessings." She patted Lilah's hand. "Besides, you're part of this community now. You should be there." After Mrs. Fullerton left, Lilah stood motionless behind the counter, emotions warring within her. New life. God's blessings. The words echoed painfully in her mind. Before she could compose herself, the bell jangled again and Keegan entered, carrying a wooden crate. "Morning," he said, setting the crate on the counter. "Thompson ordered these tools from the blacksmith, said they were expected." "Yes, thank you," Lilah replied, not quite meeting his eyes. She reached for the ledger to mark the delivery. Keegan hesitated, then asked, "Are you all right? You look a bit pale." "I'm fine," she said automatically. Then, perhaps because the emotional walls she'd constructed were already weakened by Mrs. Fullerton's news, she added, "Just received word about the new Wilson baby." Understanding dawned in his eyes, though Lilah couldn't fathom how he could possibly understand the complex emotions the news stirred in her. "Heard about that. Good news for them." "Yes, of course," she agreed, forcing brightness into her tone. He studied her for a moment, then said gently, "Not all news of babies brings joy to everyone." Lilah's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his in surprise. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet empathy that threatened to undo her. "I should go," he said, sensing her discomfort. "Tell Thompson I'll stop by later about that mare he's interested in." As he turned to leave, Lilah found herself speaking. "I won't be attending the celebration on Sunday." Keegan paused, looking back at her. No, she confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't." He nodded slowly. "Would you like company elsewhere that day? Perhaps a ride out to Eagle Point. The view's something special this time of year." The offer hung between them, an alternative, an escape, an understanding. Against her better judgment, Lilah found herself accepting. "Yes. That would be preferable." "I'll fetch you after services then," he said, a small smile touching his lips. "Wear something warm." After he left, Lilah wondered at her own decision. She had been carefully avoiding being alone with Keegan since the night of the social. Yet here she was, agreeing to spend an entire afternoon in his company. It was reckless, potentially heart-wrenching, and absolutely necessary for her sanity on a day when the town would be celebrating the very thing she had been denied. Sunday dawned clear and cold, the autumn sunlight sharp against the vibrant colors of the changing landscape. Lilah attended services as usual, sitting quietly in the back of the small church. She noticed Keegan a few rows ahead, his broad shoulders and dark hair easily recognizable. He didn't look back, but somehow she felt he was aware of her presence. After the service, as families gathered to head to the Wilson home, Lilah slipped away to change into the warm clothes Keegan had suggested. She had just returned to the front of the mercantile when he arrived with 2 horses, his chestnut mare and a gentle-looking dun gelding. "Hope you don't mind riding," he said as he helped her mount. "It's the best way to reach Eagle Point." "I grew up on a small farm," she replied. "I'm comfortable with horses," he smiled. "Good to know." They rode in companionable silence, leaving the town behind and following a trail that wound through aspen groves and pine forests. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant snow. Lilah found the rhythm of the horse beneath her, and the quiet presence of the man beside her surprisingly soothing. Eagle Point proved to be aptly named a rocky outcropping that offered a panoramic view of the valley below and the mountains beyond. Keegan helped her dismount and secured the horses, then led her to a sheltered spot where the sun warmed the rocks. "Worth the ride?" he asked as they settled on a flat boulder. Lilah gazed out at the spectacular vista. "Absolutely. It's breathtaking." He produced a small bundle from his saddlebag: bread, cheese, and apples, along with a flask of hot coffee. "Thought you might be hungry." The simple meal tasted better than any fancy dinner could have. They ate in silence for a while, the vastness of the landscape making conversation seem unnecessary. Eventually, though, Keegan spoke. "My sister couldn't have children," he said quietly, his eyes on the distant mountains. "Married 5 years, wanted them desperately. Each month that passed without a child was like a small death for her." Lilah froze, the piece of apple halfway to her lips. Of all the things she had expected him to say, this wasn't it. She blamed herself, he continued. Thought God was punishing her for something, though she was the gentlest soul I ever knew. "What happened?" Lilah asked, barely audible. She and her husband adopted 2 orphans from the war siblings whose parents were killed. Found that family comes in many forms. He turned to look at her. "She's living in Oregon now, with those children nearly grown and a heart full of joy." Lilah set down the apple, unable to eat. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I saw your face when Mrs. Fullerton mentioned the Wilson baby." His voice was gentle, devoid of pity. "And because I think you're carrying a burden alone that doesn't need to be yours alone." The understanding in his eyes was her undoing. Tears she had held back for months, years spilled over. "I was married before," she whispered, the words painful to speak aloud. "For 7 years. We tried. Every month, every year. Nothing, and then he." She swallowed hard. "He found someone who could give him what I couldn't." Keegan didn't reach for her hand or offer empty platitudes. He simply sat with her, a solid presence as she released years of accumulated grief. "The divorce was finalized 8 months ago," she continued, wiping her tears. "I couldn't stay there with the whispers and the pity, so I came here where no one knew me or my shame." "There's no shame in what happened to you, Lilah," Keegan said firmly. "The shame belongs to the man who broke his vows." She shook her head. "You don't understand. A woman's purpose is to bear children when she can't." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Is that all you believe a woman is for?" he asked, his tone serious but not judgmental. "It's what I was raised to believe," she replied honestly. "What most believe." "I don't," he said simply. "My mother taught me that people have value beyond their ability to produce something, be it children, crops, or coin. We have value because we are." The concept was so foreign, so contrary to everything Lilah had internalized, that she could only stare at him. Keegan continued, his gaze steady on hers. The way I see it, God gives each of us different paths. Some lead through parenthood, others don't. Doesn't make any path less valuable or less blessed. They sat in silence after that, the weight of his words settling around Lilah like a warm blanket. She had never considered that her inability to bear children might not define her worth as a woman, as a person. The possibility was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the valley, Keegan stood and offered his hand. "We should head back before dark." Lilah accepted his help, noticing how perfectly her hand fit in his. "Thank you for bringing me here today," she said softly. "For everything." "Anytime, Lilah," he replied, and she knew he meant it. The ride back to Redemption Creek was as quiet as the journey out, but the silence between them had transformed into something comfortable, even intimate. When they reached the mercantile, Keegan helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Would you have dinner with me sometime?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of vulnerability she hadn't heard before. "Not at the restaurant. I'm a fair cook, believe it or not, at my place." Lilah hesitated only briefly. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I'd like that." His smile was worth any risk her heart might face. The dinner invitation marked a turning point in Lilah's life in Redemption Creek. Over the following weeks, she and Keegan began spending more time together, shared meals, walks through town, quiet conversations by the creek. She learned that he had come west after the war, seeking a fresh start much like she had. He discovered her love of reading and began bringing her books from his own small collection. Their relationship developed slowly, deliberately, each of them cautious with the fragile trust growing between them. Keegan never pushed for more than Lilah was ready to give, seeming content with her company and conversation. But in quiet moments when their hands would brush or their eyes meet, Lilah felt a connection deepening into something that both thrilled and frightened her. As winter descended on Redemption Creek, bringing snow and ice that transformed the landscape, the community drew closer together. The first major snowstorm hit in early December, burying the town under 3 feet of snow and making travel between buildings an adventure. Keegan appeared at the mercantile that morning, having shoveled a path from his livery, his beard and eyebrows frosted white. "Thought you might need some help clearing the walkway," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "Mr. Thompson would appreciate that," Lilah replied with a smile. "He's not as young as he once was." Together they cleared the snow from the front of the store, their breath creating clouds in the frigid air. When they finished, Keegan invited her to his home for supper that evening. "If you're willing to brave the cold," he added with a grin. "I'll bring pie," she promised. "Mrs. Thompson taught me her apple recipe." His small house near the livery was warm and inviting, a testament to the care he took with his surroundings. A fire blazed in the hearth, and delicious smells wafted from the kitchen. The furnishings were simple but well made, many crafted by his own hands, he told her. As they ate the venison stew he'd prepared, Lilah found herself more at ease than she'd been in years. Conversation flowed naturally between them, punctuated by comfortable silences. After they'd finished her apple pie, they settled in front of the fire, each with a cup of coffee. "Christmas is coming," Keegan remarked, watching the dancing flames. "Town always does a big celebration on Christmas Eve, dinner at the church, carols, gifts for the children." "Sounds lovely," Lilah said, thinking of the holidays she'd spent with her former husband's family, formal, cold affairs where she'd always felt inadequate. "I was thinking," he continued, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "that perhaps you'd allow me to escort you. As well, as more than just friends." Lilah's heart skipped a beat. They had been careful to maintain the appearance of friendship in public, though she suspected many in town had already drawn their own conclusions about the nature of their relationship. "Are you asking to court me, Keegan Everett?" she asked, a smile playing at her lips despite her racing pulse. He met her eyes, his expression serious. "I am. I care for you, Lilah, more than I expected to care for anyone again, and I hope that you might feel something for me too." The moment of truth had arrived. Lilah had been holding part of herself back, afraid of risking her heart again. But sitting there in the warm glow of the fire, looking at this man who had shown her nothing but respect and understanding, she knew it was time to be brave. "I do," she admitted softly. "Feel something. And yes, I would be honored to attend the Christmas celebration with you." The smile that spread across his face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Keegan reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "Thank you," he said simply. He didn't try to kiss her that night, though Lilah found herself wondering what it would be like. Instead, he walked her back to her room above the mercantile, his arm protective around her shoulders against the bitter cold. At her door, he squeezed her hand and said, "Sweet dreams, Lilah Porter," before heading back into the night. Lilah watched him go, snow swirling around his tall figure, and felt something settle in her heart, a certainty that had been missing for a very long time. The Christmas Eve celebration was everything Keegan had promised and more. The church was transformed with evergreen boughs, candles, and ribbons. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every household in Redemption Creek. Children ran about in excitement, while adults chatted and laughed, the usual social divisions forgotten in the spirit of the season. Keegan and Lilah arrived together, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. She wore her best dress, a deep green wool that complemented her chestnut hair, and he had donned a clean shirt and string tie for the occasion. Heads turned as they entered, and Lilah felt a moment of self-consciousness before Mrs. Thompson hurried over to welcome them. "Don't you two look splendid?" she exclaimed, her eyes twinkling with approval. "Come, come, there's mulled cider waiting and the children are about to sing." The evening passed in a blur of food, music, and laughter. Lilah found herself drawn into conversations and activities, no longer the quiet newcomer but an accepted member of the community. Through it all, Keegan remained at her side, his presence a steady anchor. After the feast and the singing, as families prepared to head home through the snowy night, Reverend Bradley called for attention. "Before we depart, I'd like to offer a special blessing for our community," he announced. "This past year has brought new faces to Redemption Creek, new friendships, new beginnings. Let us remember that in the birth we celebrate tonight, God showed us that hope often comes in unexpected packages, and that love is the greatest gift we can share." His eyes seemed to linger on Lilah and Keegan as he spoke, and she felt a flush rise to her cheeks. Keegan's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own in a public declaration of their relationship. The walk back to her room was magical, with snowflakes drifting down and the full moon casting a silvery glow over the town. They stopped at the foot of the stairs leading to her door. "I have something for you," Keegan said, reaching into his coat pocket. "A Christmas gift." "But I didn't get you anything," Lilah protested, embarrassed. He shook his head. "Your company tonight was gift enough, but I wanted you to have this." He handed her a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers. "I made it," he explained as she ran her fingers over the intricate design. "Open it." Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a delicate silver locket. "It was my mother's," he said softly. "One of the few things I have left of her." Lilah looked up at him, stunned by the significance of the gift. "Keegan, I can't accept this. It's too precious." "That's exactly why I want you to have it," he replied, taking the locket from the box. "Turn around." She did, lifting her hair as he fastened the chain around her neck. The locket rested just below her collarbone, warm against her skin. When she turned back to face him, his eyes held an emotion that made her breath catch. "Lilah," he said, his voice husky, "may I kiss you?" In answer, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, a tentative exploration, but deepened as his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Lilah felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her. "Merry Christmas, Keegan," she whispered. "Merry Christmas, my Lilah," he replied, and in those simple words she heard a promise. Winter in Montana was long and harsh, but for Lilah the cold months passed with unexpected warmth. Her relationship with Keegan blossomed, their courtship conducted under the approving eyes of the community. They spent evenings by his fireplace, reading aloud or simply talking. On clear days, they went sledding with the town's children or took the horses out for short rides through the snow-covered landscape. By the time spring began to melt the snowdrifts, revealing patches of muddy ground and early wildflowers, Lilah had come to a realization. She had fallen deeply, irrevocably in love with Keegan Everett. And though he hadn't spoken the words, she believed he loved her too. The proof came on a mild April evening. Keegan had invited her for a ride, saying he wanted to show her something. They followed a familiar trail to a meadow just beginning to green with new growth. In the center of the meadow stood a partially constructed log cabin. "What is this?" Lilah asked as they dismounted. Keegan took her hand and led her toward the structure. "It's a house," he said simply. "Or it will be. You're building a new home, but your place in town, it's too small for what I hope for," he interrupted gently. "This land has been mine for years. I was waiting for the right reason to build on it." Understanding dawned slowly as Lilah took in the careful construction, the beautiful setting with its view of distant mountains, the hope in Keegan's eyes. "This winter, being with you. It's shown me what I want for my future, Lilah." He took both her hands in his. "I want to wake up every morning with you beside me. I want to build a life with you, whatever that life may hold." Tears welled in Lilah's eyes as Keegan dropped to one knee before her. "I know about your fears," he said softly. "I know you're afraid that I might someday want what you believe you can't give. But Lilah, I don't love you for what you might give me in the future. I love you for who you are now, today." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "Lilah Porter, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" 1,000 thoughts raced through Lilah's mind, doubts, fears, memories of past pain. But stronger than all of these was the certainty that Keegan Everett was unlike any man she had known. He had seen her brokenness and loved her anyway. He had given her space to heal and time to trust again. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Keegan, I will marry you." The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you, Lilah, I will spend every day making sure you never regret this decision." "I know," she replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I trust you." Those 3 words, perhaps even more than her acceptance of his proposal, seemed to touch him deeply. He kissed her again, more gently this time, sealing the promise between them. As they rode back to town, plans already forming for their wedding and their life together, Lilah felt a peace she had thought forever beyond her reach. Whatever the future held, she would face it with Keegan by her side. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Redemption Creek. The community embraced the news with enthusiasm, particularly Mrs. Thompson, who immediately began planning what she called the wedding of the decade. "June," she declared firmly over tea in her kitchen. "June is perfect for weddings, and it will give us time to prepare everything properly." Lilah and Keegan exchanged amused glances. "We were thinking something smaller," Lilah ventured. "Perhaps just a simple ceremony after Sunday services." Mrs. Thompson waved away the suggestion as if swatting a fly. "Nonsense! This town hasn't had a proper wedding in years. We need the celebration, dear. Trust me." In the end, they compromised. The wedding would take place in June, as Mrs. Thompson insisted, but would maintain the simplicity Lilah preferred. The ceremony would be held in the church, followed by a community gathering in the town square. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Keegan worked tirelessly on their new home, determined to have it ready for them to move in after the ceremony. Lilah divided her time between her duties at the mercantile and preparations for the wedding, including the creation of her wedding dress, a project undertaken with the help of the town sewing circle. Through it all, their relationship deepened. Each evening, they would walk together, sometimes talking about their future, sometimes simply enjoying the companionable silence between them. Lilah began to share more of her past with Keegan, the pain of each month's disappointment during her first marriage, the cruel words her former husband had flung at her before leaving, the humiliation of the divorce. Keegan listened without judgment, offering comfort when she needed it and anger on her behalf when that was what she required. In turn, he opened up about his own struggles, the loss of his parents, the difficult years after the war, the loneliness he had felt before her arrival in Redemption Creek. Their shared vulnerability strengthened the bond between them, building a foundation of honesty and trust. As June approached, Lilah found herself increasingly nervous, not about marrying Keegan, of that she was certain, but about the life that would follow. Despite his assurances, the fear that he might someday regret choosing a barren woman lingered in the darkest corners of her mind. 2 weeks before the wedding, Lilah visited Dr. Fullerton. She had been putting off the appointment, dreading the confirmation of what she already knew, but felt she owed Keegan one last attempt to understand her condition. The doctor's office was clean and orderly, much like the man himself. After a thorough examination and many questions about her history, he sat across from her with a thoughtful expression. "Mrs. Porter, soon to be Mrs. Everett," he began, his tone professional but kind. "There is nothing in my examination that conclusively indicates you cannot bear children." Lilah stared at him in disbelief. "But I was married for 7 years. We tried constantly. My former husband's new wife conceived within months." Dr. Fullerton nodded. "Sometimes these matters are complex. There are many factors involved in conception: timing, health of both parties, stress." He paused. "I've seen cases where a woman believed herself barren, only to conceive with a different husband, and others where years passed before a first pregnancy occurred." "Are you saying there's hope?" Lilah asked, her voice barely audible. "I'm saying that medically, I see no reason to declare you incapable of bearing children. Is it possible you have an undetected condition? Yes. Is it also possible that the issue lay with your former husband or with the combination of the two of you? Also yes." He smiled kindly. "My advice, Mrs. Porter, is to enter your marriage without this burden of certainty about what cannot be. Let nature take its course." Lilah left the doctor's office in a daze, his words echoing in her mind. For so long, she had defined herself by this perceived failure. The possibility that she might not be barren after all was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. If there was hope, there was also the potential for further disappointment. She didn't tell Keegan about the doctor's assessment. Part of her feared raising hopes that might never be fulfilled. Another part, the part still healing from years of believing herself defective, couldn't quite embrace the possibility. Their wedding day dawned bright and clear, the June sky a perfect blue. Lilah stood in Mrs. Thompson's bedroom, where she had been prepared by the women of the town like a daughter being sent to her groom. Her dress was simple but beautiful cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the bodice and hem, work that had been shared among the women of the sewing circle. Her hair was arranged in soft curls, adorned with small white flowers. "You look radiant," Mrs. Thompson said, her eyes misty. "Keegan is a fortunate man." "I'm the fortunate one," Lilah replied softly. The church was filled to capacity when Lilah entered on Mr. Thompson's arm. The absence of her own father keenly felt, but softened by the kindness of the man, who had become something of a father figure to her, in Redemption Creek. But all thoughts fled as she caught sight of Keegan waiting at the altar, his face illuminated with a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. The ceremony itself was a blur, words spoken, promises made, a kiss that sealed their union amidst the cheers of their community. What Lilah remembered most clearly was the moment they were pronounced husband and wife, when Keegan squeezed her hands and whispered, "My wife," with such reverence that she knew, without doubt, that she was treasured. The celebration that followed was everything Mrs. Thompson had promised: food and music, dancing and laughter, the entire town coming together to honor their union. As evening approached, Keegan found Lilah amidst a group of well-wishers. "Ready to see our home, Mrs. Everett?" he asked, his eyes dancing with excitement. Lilah's heart skipped at her new name. "More than ready, Mr. Everett." They rode out to their new cabin as the sun began to set, casting golden light across the landscape. Keegan had completed the structure in time for their wedding, though he explained that there were still details to be finished. When they arrived, he insisted on carrying her across the threshold. Inside, Lilah gasped at what he had accomplished. The main room was spacious and welcoming, with a stone fireplace and windows that captured the view of the mountains. Simple but beautiful furniture, much of it crafted by Keegan's hands, filled the space. A doorway led to their bedroom, where a large bed covered in a quilt, a wedding gift from the sewing circle, awaited them. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to embrace her husband. "Absolutely perfect." Later, as they lay tangled in each other's arms, the moonlight spilling through the window to cast silver patterns across their skin, Lilah found the courage to share what Dr. Fullerton had told her. He said, "There's no medical reason he could find that I couldn't have children," she said softly, her head resting on Keegan's chest. "That it might have been other factors." Keegan's hand, which had been gently stroking her back, stilled. "What are you saying, Lilah?" She raised her head to look into his eyes. "I'm saying that maybe someday, we could have a child together. But I don't want you to hope too much, because it might never happen, and I couldn't bear to disappoint." He silenced her with a kiss, deep and tender. "Listen to me," he said when they parted. "If God blesses us with children, I will be overjoyed. And if he doesn't, I will still be the happiest man in the territory, because I have you. You could never disappoint me, Lilah. Never." Tears slipped down her cheeks as the last of her fears dissolved in the face of his unconditional love. "I love you, Keegan Everett," she whispered, "with all that I am." "And I love you, Lilah Everett," he replied, pulling her close, "today and all the days to come." Life settled into a rhythm for the newlyweds. Lilah continued working at the mercantile, though with reduced hours now that she had a home to manage as well. Keegan's livery business thrived, and he began taking on more work training horses for ranchers in the area. Their cabin became a warm and welcoming haven, and they often hosted dinners for friends from town. As summer turned to autumn and then winter, Lilah found herself fully embracing her new life. The ghost of her past, the woman who had defined herself by her inability to conceive, began to fade, replaced by the confident, loved woman she was becoming as Keegan's wife. They didn't speak often about the possibility of children, though neither actively prevented conception. Each month when her courses came, Lilah felt a small pang of disappointment, but it wasn't the devastating blow it had once been. Her life with Keegan was full and joyous, children or no. Their first Christmas as husband and wife was a celebration of abundance, not in material wealth, but in love and community. They hosted Christmas dinner in their cabin, somehow fitting Mrs. and Mr. Thompson, Dr. and Mrs. Fullerton, and the school teacher Miss Davis around their table. The small house rang with laughter and conversation, and Lilah caught Keegan watching her several times with an expression of such contentment that it warmed her from within. Winter in Montana stretched long, with January bringing bitter cold and heavy snows that often left them housebound for days. They spent those days in domestic harmony, Keegan working on small woodworking projects, Lilah baking or sewing, both reading aloud to each other in the evenings by the fire. It was during one of these storms, as February blew in with a particular vengeance, that Lilah first suspected something had changed. The dizziness came without warning as she stood from stoking the fire. Keegan caught her before she could fall, his face creased with concern. "Lilah, what is it?" "Just a moment of lightheadedness," she assured him, though privately she wondered. She had been more tired lately, and certain foods that she usually enjoyed now turned her stomach. But she dared not hope, not yet. A week later, when her monthly courses failed to arrive, Lilah could no longer deny the possibility. Still, she kept her suspicions to herself, afraid that speaking them aloud might somehow jinx this fragile hope. It was Mrs. Thompson who finally confronted her, pulling her aside one afternoon at the Mercantile. "Lilah Everett," she said, her voice low but firm, "are you with child?" Lilah's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. I don't know for certain," she whispered. "I'm afraid to believe it." The older woman's expression softened. "Have you spoken to Dr. Fullerton?" Lilah shook her head. "Not yet. I wanted to be sure before I told Keegan. She swallowed hard. "He's been so understanding about the possibility that we might never have children. I don't want to raise his hopes unnecessarily." Mrs. Thompson took Lilah's hands in her own. "My dear girl, that man loves you more than life itself. Whether you're carrying his child or not won't change that, but if you are—" She smiled. "Well, I think you owe it to both of you to find out for certain." That evening after supper, Lilah gathered her courage. "I think I should see Dr. Fullerton tomorrow," she said as they sat by the fire. Keegan looked up from his book, concern immediate in his eyes. "Are you unwell?" "No, not unwell," she replied carefully, "but I've been different lately, tired, dizzy at times." She took a deep breath. "And I'm late. Almost 2 weeks now." Understanding dawned slowly on his face, followed by a cautious hope that he quickly tried to mask. "You think you might be pregnant," she finished for him, the word both terrifying and exhilarating to speak aloud. "Yes, I think I might be." Keegan set aside his book and moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "Lilah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "whatever the doctor says tomorrow, know that I love you, just you, as you are." She touched his cheek, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I know, and that's why I can face whatever comes next." The visit to Dr. Fullerton the following day confirmed what Lilah had begun to suspect. She was indeed with child, approximately 2 months along. The doctor cautioned that, given her history, she should take special care, rest more, avoid heavy lifting. prepare herself for the possibility that the pregnancy might not progress. But beneath his professional caution, Lilah could see his genuine pleasure at delivering this news. "A baby is a blessing," he said as she prepared to leave. "And you, Mrs. Everett, have been blessed." Keegan was waiting at the livery when she returned to town, his face a study in contained anxiety. When she nodded, a smile breaking across her face like sunshine, he let out a whoop that startled the horses in their stalls. In 2 strides he reached her, lifting her off her feet in a gentle embrace before suddenly setting her down again. "I'm sorry." "I shouldn't jostle you," he said, his hands hovering protectively near her still flat abdomen. Lilah laughed, the sound pure joy. "I'm not made of glass, Keegan. The baby and I are strong." "The baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." News of the pregnancy spread quickly through Redemption Creek. The community that had embraced Lilah as a newcomer, celebrated her marriage, and welcomed her as one of their own now surrounded the expectant parents with support and excitement. The women of the town shared advice, remedies for morning sickness, and began planning quilts and baby clothes. The men, taking their cue from Keegan's protective stance, were quick to help Lilah with any physical task, sometimes to her amused exasperation. As spring bloomed across the landscape, so too did Lilah's body change, her belly swelling with the new life within. Each milestone, the first time she felt the baby move, the day she could no longer button her dresses, the morning she woke to find Keegan's hand resting protectively on her rounded stomach, was a small miracle after years of believing this experience would never be hers. Yet beneath the joy lurked a shadow of fear. Dr. Fullerton's warnings echoed in her mind, and each twinge or discomfort sent a spike of anxiety through her. What if, after coming so far, she lost this precious gift? Keegan seemed to sense her unspoken fears. Each night as they lay in bed, his hand would gently caress her growing belly, and he would whisper stories to their unborn child, tales of brave horses, beautiful mountains, and the love that had brought its parents together. "This baby is strong," he would assure Lilah, "just like its mother." Summer arrived, bringing heat that made Lilah's condition more uncomfortable. Now, in her 7th month, she found movement increasingly difficult and had reduced her hours at the mercantile to just mornings. Keegan had built a comfortable chair for the porch of their cabin, positioned to catch the afternoon breeze, and she spent many hours there, sewing tiny garments and watching the play of light across the distant mountains. It was during one of these peaceful afternoons in late July that a rider appeared on the path to their cabin, Mrs. Thompson's teenage son, Timothy, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Mrs. Everett," he called as he dismounted. "Ma sent me to fetch you. There's been an accident at the livery." "Mr. Everett's been hurt." Lilah's heart seemed to stop. "Hurt? How badly?" "Don't know all the details, madam. Something about a spooked horse. Doc Fullerton's with him now. Ma said to bring you in the buggy. She didn't want you riding in your condition." The journey to town was a blur of fear and silent prayers. Lilah clung to the seat of the buggy as Timothy drove as quickly as was safe, her thoughts a chaotic mix of concern for Keegan and worry about what stress might do to the baby. They arrived at the doctor's office to find Mrs. Thompson waiting outside. Her expression was grave but not devastated, which gave Lilah a small measure of relief. "He's conscious," Mrs. Thompson said immediately, taking Lilah's hands. "Broken leg, some cracked ribs, nasty cut on his head, but Dr. Fullerton says he'll heal completely with time." Lilah sagged with relief. "Thank God. Can I see him?" "Of course. He's been asking for you." Mrs. Thompson helped Lilah up the steps, supporting her with a steady arm. "Now don't you worry about anything else. We'll take care of the livery until he's back on his feet," The whole town will pitch in." Keegan lay on the examination table, his left leg splinted and bandaged, his torso wrapped tightly. A line of neat stitches closed a gash near his hairline. Despite his injuries, his face lit up when Lilah entered. "There she is," he said, his voice weaker than normal but still warm with love. "My beautiful wife." Lilah moved to his side, careful not to jostle him as she bent to kiss his forehead. "You gave me quite a scare," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm sorry, love. New stallion from the Peterson ranch decided he didn't like being shod." He attempted a smile that turned into a grimace of pain. "Got me good with those hooves before they could pull him off." Dr. Fullerton entered, his manner professional but kind. "He's lucky, Mrs. Everett. The leg is a clean break that should heal well. The ribs will be painful for a while but didn't puncture anything important, and the head wound, while dramatic looking, is superficial." "When can I take him home?" Lilah asked. The doctor hesitated. "He should stay here tonight so I can monitor him. Tomorrow, if all goes well, we can move him to your home. But he'll need complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks, and that leg won't bear weight for 6 to 8 weeks. The implications sank in slowly. Keegan would be bedridden, unable to work. At the same time, Lilah was approaching the end of her pregnancy and would be least able to care for him. The worry must have shown on her face because Keegan reached for her hand. "We'll manage," he said softly. "Together, as always." The following day, a group of men from town carefully transported Keegan to their cabin in a wagon padded with quilts. Mrs. Thompson and several other women had gone ahead, preparing their home for an invalid, setting up a bed in the main room where he could be more easily tended, stocking the kitchen with prepared meals, arranging for a rotation of helpers to assist with his care. As they settled Keegan into his temporary bed, Lilah was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. "I don't know how to thank you all," she said, tears threatening. "No need for thanks," said Mr. Thompson gruffly. "This is what community does. We take care of our own." The weeks that followed tested both Lilah and Keegan. His injuries caused him considerable pain, and the forced inactivity chafed at his independent nature. Lilah, meanwhile, grew increasingly uncomfortable as her pregnancy advanced, her back aching constantly and sleep becoming elusive. Yet in this shared vulnerability, they discovered new depths to their relationship. Keegan, unable to physically protect and provide as he was accustomed to doing, found other ways to support Lilah, listening to her fears about the coming birth, making her laugh when discomfort made her weary, directing the steady stream of community helpers who came to assist them. Lilah, for her part, tended to Keegan's injuries with gentle hands and unwavering patience, even as her own body demanded attention. In the quiet evenings, they would talk about the future, about the child that would soon join them, about the life they were building together despite the obstacles. "We're quite a pair," Keegan remarked one night as Lilah eased herself into a chair beside his bed, her hand absently rubbing her swollen belly. "Me with my broken bones, you ready to burst," she laughed softly. "Not the situation I imagined for my final month of pregnancy." "No," he agreed, reaching for her hand. "But in a way it's fitting. Our love has never followed the expected path, has it?" Lilah thought about their journey, her arrival in Redemption Creek carrying the wounds of her past, his patient courtship, the healing they had found together. "No, it hasn't. But I wouldn't change a moment of it." He squeezed her hand, his eyes serious. "Lilah, I need you to promise me something. When the time comes for the baby to be born, I want you to focus only on yourself and our child. Don't worry about me, I'll be fine." "Keegan, promise me," he insisted. "Your strength needs to be for the two of you. Let the others help with me." Reluctantly, she nodded. "I promise." The promise was tested sooner than either expected. 3 nights later, Lilah awoke to a sharp pain across her abdomen. She sat up in bed, breathing deeply as Dr. Fullerton had instructed her to do if labor began. The pain subsided, and she wondered if it had been a false alarm until another contraction seized her 10 minutes later. "Keegan," she called softly, not wanting to startle him. "I think it's time." Despite his injuries, he was immediately alert. "The baby's coming." "Now?" "I believe so," she replied, trying to keep her voice calm despite the fear fluttering in her chest. "It's early, though, almost 3 weeks." "Early but not dangerously so," he reassured her, though she could see his own anxiety beneath the confident words. "I'll send Timothy for Dr. Fullerton and Mrs. Thompson." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and anticipation. Dr. Fullerton arrived quickly, confirming that labor had indeed begun. Mrs. Thompson came soon after, taking charge of the household with quiet efficiency, setting water to boil and preparing the bedroom for the birth. Throughout it all, Keegan remained in his bed in the main room, separated from Lilah by just a wall but unable to be at her side as he had hoped. He listened to her cries with clenched fists, each sound of pain a physical ache in his own body. "She's strong," Mrs. Thompson assured him during one of her brief appearances in the main room. "The labor is progressing well." As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, a new cry joined the symphony of sounds in the small cabin, the lusty wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Keegan's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. He struggled to sit up straighter, ignoring the pain from his ribs, his entire being focused on the sounds from the bedroom. Dr. Fullerton emerged first, his face tired but smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Everett. You have a healthy daughter." "A daughter," Keegan repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "And Lilah, tired but well. It was a straightforward birth, despite being a bit early. She's asking for you." Mrs. Thompson appeared next, carrying a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Someone wants to meet her papa," she said, carefully placing the infant in Keegan's arms. The moment was one Keegan would remember for the rest of his life, the tiny weight of his daughter in his arms, her face scrunched and red, impossibly small fingers flexing against the blanket. Love, fierce and overwhelming, surged through him. "Hello, little one," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm your pa." The baby's eyes, unfocused but seeming to seek the source of his voice, blinked open. Keegan felt tears streak down his cheeks, unashamed of his emotion. "Can I see Lilah now?" he asked, reluctant to release his daughter but desperate to see his wife. With Mrs. Thompson's help, they managed to move his bed closer to the bedroom door, allowing him to see into the room where Lilah lay propped against pillows, her face exhausted but radiant. "Keegan," she called softly, reaching out her hand, "we have a daughter." "She's perfect," he replied, his voice choked, just like her mother. Lilah's eyes filled with tears. "We did it. After everything, we have our miracle. What shall we name her?" Keegan asked, gently rocking the now sleeping infant in his arms. Lilah considered for a moment. "Faith," she said finally. "Faith Elizabeth Everett. Because that's what brought us here, faith in each other, faith that God had a plan for us, even when we couldn't see it." "Faith," Keegan repeated, testing the name against the reality of the tiny person in his arms. "It's perfect." The weeks following Faith's birth were a time of adjustment for the new family. Keegan's injuries slowly healed, allowing him more mobility, though he still relied on crutches to move around. Lilah recovered from childbirth with the resilience that characterized her approach to life, though she often found herself exhausted from the demands of a newborn. The community continued to support them, bringing meals, helping with household tasks, and offering childcare advice, some welcome, some less so. Through it all, Lilah and Keegan found a new rhythm together, their partnership deepening as they navigated the challenges of new parenthood. By autumn, life had settled into a new normal. Keegan had returned to work at the livery, though he now employed a young man to help with the more physically demanding tasks. Lilah spent her days caring for Faith, her heart full with the joy of motherhood she had once thought would be denied to her. One crisp October afternoon, as the aspen leaves glowed golden in the sunlight, Keegan suggested a family outing. Faith should see Eagle Point before winter sets in, he said, securing the baby in a sling across Lilah's chest. And we could use a few hours away from the cabin. They rode together on Keegan's gentle mare, Faith safely nestled between them. The trail to Eagle Point was familiar now, but seeing it through the lens of parenthood gave it new meaning. This was the land their daughter would know as home. These mountains would form the backdrop of her childhood. At the summit, they spread a blanket on the same flat boulder where, over a year ago, Lilah had first opened her heart to Keegan, sharing her deepest fears. Faith lay between them, cooing at the play of light through the golden leaves, her tiny hands reaching for the sunbeams. "I never imagined this," Lilah said softly, tracing her daughter's perfect features with a gentle finger. "Even after we married, even after Dr. Fullerton said it might be possible, I was afraid to truly hope." Keegan reached across their child to take her hand. "Do you remember what I said to you that day you told me you might be pregnant?" She nodded. "You said that whatever the doctor found, you loved me as I was." "I meant it then, and I mean it now," he said, his eyes serious. "This miracle," he gestured to Faith, "she's a blessing beyond measure. But you, Lilah Everett, you were already my miracle." Lilah's eyes filled with tears. "Sometimes I think about all the paths that led us here, my failed marriage, your decision to build a life in Redemption Creek, the chance meeting on my first day in town. If any one thing had been different, we might never have found each other." Keegan smiled, the afternoon sun highlighting the silver that had begun to thread through his dark hair, a legacy, he joked, of the stress of new fatherhood. "Then God waited for us together," he said simply. "All those years when you thought you were broken, when I thought I was destined to be alone. He was preparing us for each other, for Faith, for this life we're building." "Together," Lilah whispered, the word both a confirmation and a promise. Faith made a small sound of contentment, her eyes drifting closed in the warm autumn sunlight. Keegan and Lilah sat in peaceful silence, watching their daughter sleep, the vastness of the landscape before them, a reminder of the journey that had brought them to this moment, and the many adventures that still lay ahead. As they prepared to return home, Keegan gathered Faith into his arms, cradling her with the confidence he had developed over the past months. "Mrs. Everett," he said, a glint of mischief in his eyes, "may I have the honor of escorting you and our daughter back to our humble abode?" Lilah laughed, the sound carrying across the mountaintop. "Mr. Everett, nothing would please me more." Together they made their way down the trail, a family formed not by conventional paths but by resilience, faith, and a love strong enough to overcome the wounds of the past. Behind them, the setting sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, a fitting backdrop to the end of one chapter and the beginning of countless more in the story they were writing together. 2 years passed, seasons turning in their eternal cycle, each bringing new joys and challenges to the Everett family. Faith grew from a helpless infant into a sturdy toddler with her mother's chestnut curls and her father's determined spirit. She filled their cabin with laughter and the endless questions of a curious mind discovering the world. Keegan's business prospered, his reputation as a fair dealer and skilled horseman drawing customers from beyond Redemption Creek. Lilah managed their home with quiet efficiency, finding fulfillment in creating a nurturing environment for her family. In the spring of Faith's third year, as wildflowers once again carpeted the meadow around their cabin, Lilah discovered she was expecting their second child. The news was received with joy, but without the frantic anxiety that had accompanied her first pregnancy. This time, she embraced the experience with confidence, secure in the knowledge of her body's ability to nurture new life. "Another miracle," Keegan said, his hand resting on her still flat abdomen as they lay in bed one night. "Did you ever imagine when you first stepped off that stage in Redemption Creek that this would be your life?" Lilah considered the question, thinking back to the wounded woman who had arrived in town, carrying her grief like a physical burden. "Never," she admitted. "I came here hoping for peace, perhaps even contentment. But this," she covered his hand with her own, "this abundance of love, this family we've created, it was beyond my wildest dreams." Keegan propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with the same tender expression she had come to cherish. "You know what I thought the first time I saw you? That I looked lost and frightened," she guessed with a small smile. He shook his head. "That you had the saddest, most beautiful eyes I'd ever seen, and that I wanted to be the one to bring joy back into them." "You have," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "1,000 times over." Their second daughter, Hope Grace Everett, arrived on a snowy December morning, a perfect Christmas gift. Faith, now old enough to understand that she was a big sister, approached the baby with a mixture of curiosity and proprietary pride. "Mine?" she asked, pointing to the swaddled infant in Lilah's arms. "Ours," Keegan corrected gently, lifting Faith onto the bed so she could see her sister better. "Just like you are ours. We're a family." Family. The word had once held such complicated emotions for Lilah: expectations unfulfilled, dreams deferred. Now it represented her greatest achievement, her most profound joy. As hope grew alongside faith, their home expanded to accommodate their growing family. Keegan added rooms to the cabin, including a special space just for the girls with low windows that offered views of the meadow and mountains beyond. Life wasn't without its difficulties. The winter of Hope's first year brought illness to Redemption Creek, a virulent fever that claimed several lives, including their dear friend Mrs. Thompson. The loss was felt deeply by the entire community, but perhaps most keenly by Lilah, who had found in the older woman a mother figure and mentor. "She saw something in me when I first arrived," Lilah said at the funeral, her voice steady despite her grief. "Something I couldn't yet see in myself. Her faith in me helped me find faith in myself again." Through this loss and other challenges, drought years that strained the livery business, minor injuries and childhood illnesses, the normal stresses of building a life together, Keegan and Lilah's relationship remained the bedrock upon which their family stood. Their love, tested and proven through adversity, only grew stronger with time. On their 10th anniversary, Keegan surprised Lilah with a 2-week trip to San Francisco, leaving the girls, now 7 and 5, in the care of Mr. Thompson and his new wife, a widow from a neighboring town. "Are you sure?" Lilah asked, torn between excitement at the adventure and reluctance to leave her children. "It's so far." "I'm sure," Keegan replied firmly. "We've never had time just for us since before Faith was born. The girls will be fine, and we've earned this." The trip proved to be everything Keegan had hoped: a second honeymoon that allowed them to reconnect as husband and wife, not just as parents. They explored the bustling city, marveled at the ocean, attended theatrical performances, and enjoyed the luxury of uninterrupted conversations. On their last night in San Francisco, as they walked along the waterfront under a canopy of stars, Keegan stopped and turned to Lilah, taking both her hands in his. "These past 10 years have been the richest of my life," he said, his voice deep with emotion. "Thank you for taking a chance on us." Lilah looked up at him, this man who had helped her rebuild her life from the ashes of disappointment. At 38, his face showed the signs of their years together, laugh lines around his eyes, a few strands of silver in his hair, but to her, he was more handsome than ever, his features marked by the life they had shared. "Thank you for showing me that my worth wasn't tied to whether I could bear children," she replied, "for loving me completely before we knew if faith or hope were possible." He drew her close, his arms around her waist. "Do you remember what I told you at Eagle Point after Faith was born?" Lilah smiled against his chest. "You said that God waited for us together." "He did," Keegan affirmed. "And every day since has proven it true. Every challenge we've faced, every joy we've celebrated, they were all part of the path that was meant for us." They returned to Redemption Creek, renewed, ready to embrace the next chapter of their lives together. The years continued to pass, marked by the familiar rhythms of frontier life and the particular milestones of their family Faith's first day of school, Hope's discovery of her talent for drawing, the addition of a son, Samuel Keegan Everett, when the girls were 9 and 7. Redemption Creek grew and changed around them. The arrival of the railroad brought new opportunities and challenges. Keegan expanded his business to include a proper stagecoach service, connecting their town to the wider world. Lilah, with her daughters now in school and her son growing more independent, accepted a position on the town council, helping to guide the community's development with the practical wisdom she had gained through her own journey. On a golden afternoon in the autumn of their 20th year in Redemption Creek, Lilah found herself once again at Eagle Point. She had ridden up alone, a rare moment of solitude in her busy life. At 48, her chestnut hair now streaked with silver, she sat on the familiar boulder and gazed out at the landscape that had witnessed so much of her story. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke her reverie. Turning, she saw Keegan riding toward her, his tall figure as recognizable to her as her own reflection. "Thought I might find you here," he said as he dismounted and joined her on the boulder. "Faith said you mentioned coming up for some thinking time." Lilah smiled, unsurprised that he had sought her out. Even after all these years, they had a way of gravitating toward each other when something important was on their minds. "Just remembering," she said, leaning against his shoulder as his arm came around her. 20 years ago, I stepped off a stage into this town, convinced that my life's greatest disappointments were behind me, but also that its greatest joys were too." Keegan's arm tightened around her. "And now?" She looked up at him, this man who had been her partner through 2 decades of love and life. "Now I know that joy isn't a fixed quantity. It grows and changes, sometimes emerging from the very places we least expect to find it." He nodded, understanding as he always did. "From broken places." "Yes," she agreed. "From broken places, from waiting, from faith that the story isn't over even when we can't see the next chapter." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent, painting the landscape in the warm hues of autumn. Below them, Redemption Creek spread out, the town that had given them both a second chance at life and love. "I'm grateful," Keegan said finally, "for every step of the journey, even the difficult ones. They all led us here." Lilah turned to face him, taking his weathered hands in hers. "Then God waited for us together," she said, echoing the words that had become a touchstone of their relationship. "And He'll be with us for whatever comes next." As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Keegan and Lilah Everett made their way down the familiar trail toward home, not just the cabin they had built together, but the life they had created from faith, hope, and a love strong enough to heal even the deepest wounds. In the story of Redemption Creek, theirs was just one tale among many. But for Lilah, who had once defined herself by what she lacked, it was a testimony to the abundance that can emerge when two hearts find each other at exactly the right moment, proving that sometimes the longest waits lead to the greatest blessings.